If you're the President of the United States, a lot of people are counting on you to do a lot of things, like manage the national economy. Of course, in order to manage it, you'll have to understand it. But the economy is pretty complex, and when experts try to explain it, they tend to use the word "like" a lot. In recent years, people have said the U.S. economy is like a zombie, a bathtub, and a babysitting business. So, what's the U.S. economy really like?
A national economy is sort of like your own family finances. You have a certain amount of money that comes in. Your mother or your father or both work and they earn money. Well, a national economy depends on hundreds of millions of people earning money. Your parents spend money on goods and services, food and rent or mortgages. The national government spends money on having a military and having roads and bridges and schools.
And where does our government get that money? On this point, all the experts agree. Taxes. There are many kinds of taxes, but basically, if money is changing hands, a little extra money goes to the government.
The more you make, the more I take.
From the earliest days of our country, taxes were a pretty hot issue. The revolutionaries' main cry to the British king was no taxation without representation. They felt that if they were giving money to the king, they should have a voice in how that money would be spent. America won its independence, but before he could start spending more money, George Washington had to figure out how to pay the bills. And there were already a lot of bills. In 1789, after 8 years of Revolutionary War, America was deeply in debt. To get our finances in order, Washington appointed Alexander Hamilton as the first Secretary of the Treasury.
Alexander Hamilton wanted there to be a central bank. He thought it was very important for the purpose of growing the economy and coordinating the economy that there be one place responsible for decisions about money and how much and what kind.
And presidents have been trying to figure out how to best manage the American people's money ever since. When Thomas Jefferson became president in 1800, he had some different ideas and moved to limit the powers of Hamilton's bank.
Thomas Jefferson wanted this economy to be decentralized. He wanted it to be a nation of small towns and farmers. Didn't trust centralized power.
But America was growing into a bigger nation. And in 1816, James Monroe believed the federal government should take on a bigger role in the economy. Monroe wanted the government to build roads and canals to help farmers bring their crops to market. This was called the American system. Then, in 1829, another president had yet another idea about how to best use and protect the American people's tax dollars.
Andrew Jackson hated the Bank of the United States because he believed it was a bastion of privilege, that it was an elite organization beyond the reach of the people that would profit at the expense of the people.
Jackson killed the national bank by moving the tax dollars to smaller state banks. But those state banks made a lot of risky loans that eventually went bad when people couldn't pay them back. The result was the financial panic of 1837, in which waves of small banks failed and unemployment skyrocketed. So if the economy were like a bathtub, when things are going well, banks make loans, people spend money, and the tub stays full. But when more money was lent out than was getting paid back, the money stopped flowing and the economy went down the drain. Jackson had believed the economy worked best when the government let people mind their own businesses, while others thought that the best government is one that would oversee the economy. The debate raged until 1861, when the Civil War came along. During the war, Abraham Lincoln had to feed and equip an army that had quickly grown to 700,000 men. How does that affect the economy? Well, if the economy were a babysitting business, suddenly needing to feed and equip 700,000 kids all at the same time, you need to quickly increase the supply of diapers to meet this new demand before things got ugly. To make sure he got what he needed for the war effort, Lincoln put the federal government in charge of the economy, authorizing the control of railroads and working closely with manufacturers. This guaranteed a steady supply of equipment for the army. The Civil War was expensive, and Lincoln needed money fast. So, he printed it, creating a new national currency called the greenback. The value of each greenback was guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Basically, our country was saying that anyone who lent America money or sold us goods would absolutely definitely be paid with a currency that they could, well, take to the bank. To ensure the Treasury could back up this guarantee, Lincoln added new taxes and brought back the central banking system. After the Civil War, American industry flourished. The presidents who followed Lincoln mostly stayed hands-off when it came to the economy. Until Teddy Roosevelt. By the time Teddy became president, a few large companies had united to control big chunks of the economy. A group of big businesses working together was called a monopoly or a trust.
Teddy Roosevelt was very concerned about the size of big businesses. He felt that monopolists, the big railroads, the big steel companies, that they were charging too much money and they were beginning to control the economy. So he used something called antitrust laws to break up the big companies, the big railroad companies, the big oil companies, the big steel companies, and create more competition.
And more new economic policies were on the horizon. A few years later, Teddy's cousin Franklin introduced his New Deal for America.
Let me assert my...
In the 1930s, President Franklin D. Roosevelt came to office in a terrible time. It was a Great Depression. 1 out of 4 people who wanted to work were out of work. Families were going without food.
Soup kitchens, shanty towns, and the wandering homeless became common scenes in American cities.
It's the worst times we've ever had. And he stood up there, and the first thing he said to the country is, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. He closed down the banks for a couple of days and then helped explain to people how the banks work, how they shouldn't pull all their money out of it. The president has to believe in the economy and help inspire confidence.
But it was more than just confidence that Roosevelt brought to the economy. His New Deal for America was a sweeping series of laws that allowed the government to put millions of people to work during the Great Depression, building parks, hospitals, and schools.
That's kind of how we got out of it. Nobody was spending because nobody had money, so he said, well, I'm the government, I'll spend.
So, if the economy were like a zombie, during the Great Depression, you could say it was the Walking Dead. But the programs of FDR zapped the life back into it. I'm alive! The centerpiece of Roosevelt's New Deal wasn't building places, it was building up people. Using new programs like the Social Security Act of 1935 that would forever change the relationship between the federal government and the people.
When fathers died in the past, children had to go to work because there was nobody to provide for the family. But the Social Security Act, what that was able to accomplish was to provide widows and their children with a certain amount of money that allowed them to survive, where the mother could stay home with the children could continue to go to school and not need to work.
FDR's programs revolutionized the role of the presidency and the government in managing the economy. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson enacted new laws built on the foundation of FDR's New Deal social programs. He called his plan the Great Society.
The man who is hungry, who cannot find work or educate his children, who is bowed by want, that man is not fully free.
Johnson's new programs funded education and urban development, gave direct aid to the poor in the form of food stamps, and provided health care to seniors and the poor through Medicare and Medicaid. The federal government's role in society had started with spending to maintain a military, gone on to creating jobs, and now included funding social programs and managing the economy. But things were about to change again. Like Johnson and Roosevelt before him, Ronald Reagan came to power determined to protect Americans' economic freedom. But while Roosevelt wanted the government to protect citizens from economic hardship, Reagan wanted to protect the economy from government interference.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
One of the main arguments of Reaganomics was that if you cut taxes for wealthy Americans and for businesses, everyone would prosper. Meaning, if the rich paid less, they would use their money for jobs, to build their businesses, and that even if you were poor, you would still benefit. So rather than focusing on programs for the poor, or rather than focusing on programs for the middle class, Reagan argued that our economic policies really needed to benefit the wealthy and our corporations.
Reagan cut taxes and eliminated many government regulations on industry. He also cut back funding for many New Deal-era programs.
When I talk of tax cuts, I'm reminded that every major tax cut in this century has strengthened the economy, generated renewed productivity, and ended up yielding new revenues for the government by creating new investment, new jobs, and more commerce among our people.
And to some extent, Ronald Reagan was right. Unfortunately, the net result of what he did was also to widen inequality. That is, the rich got richer, and everybody else didn't do quite as well.
Reagan expanded the power of the president to lead in economic matters. But did Reagan help the economy?
A president doesn't have all that much power to affect the economy. There's something called a business cycle, and that means the economy goes up, maybe sometimes with a little bit of a threat of inflation, and then the economy goes down with a threat of deflation or recession or sometimes depression. And what a president can try to do is moderate the cycle, make sure that the ups aren't too fast and the downs aren't too deep. But a president is usually given much more credit or blame for what happens in the economy than the president deserves.
But still, the president usually gets the credit or the blame. As President Truman said, the buck stops here, and he wasn't kidding.
Jimmy Carter lost the re-election in 1980 largely because the economy was doing so badly. The Federal Reserve Board raised interest rates and essentially choked off all economic activity. You could say in a way that the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board fired Jimmy Carter. The first George Bush lost re-election mostly because the economy was doing very badly.
And under the second President Bush, America slid into the largest economic crisis since the Great Depression. Barack Obama was elected president in 2008, partly because voters thought he was the best choice for making the U.S. economy strong again.
When President Obama came in, I think he found an economy that was a lot like what Franklin Roosevelt had had. And so he went and studied Roosevelt. And what had happened then was people lost their jobs. When they lost their jobs, they had less money, they spent less. Well, then the businesses that needed those customers had less money, they hired fewer people, so there were fewer jobs again, and then less money, and it all spiraled downward into this Great Depression. So Roosevelt basically said, if you can't get a job from a business, I'll hire you. And he created these government programs that hired people, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and they went out and they built things and they hired people. And that's a twofer. First, it puts people to work, but also it builds stuff that we need. Better roads, classrooms, libraries, courthouses, and that's what helped to spur us out of that Great Depression. That's what President Obama is trying to do now.
Usually when the economy is going well and people have jobs and money is flowing into their pocketbooks or their wallets, they feel very good about president, whoever the president is. And on the other hand, when the economy is turning sour, when people are losing their jobs, when they're losing money, they don't have enough money, they feel very badly about a president.
So there you have it. The president helps guide the economy. And when it's good, we can all keep our babies fed, our bathtubs full, and even our pet zombies happy. You know, if you're into that kind of thing.